As you know already, the topic that we're going to cover this week is more related to the political aspect of capitalism, and especially the democracy aspect of the politics. And we would like to know what kind of future awaits for democracy under capitalism, and the relationship between capitalism and democracy, and what we are normally kind of indoctrinated to believe is that this relationship is kind of a love relationship, and the democracy necessitates capitalism and capitalism necessitates democracy. And this is the kind of a popular myth, if you like, or misunderstanding that we would like to question, or if you're looking for a stronger word, maybe to debunk, based on questioning the ideology, the idea, in terms of, or based on some evidence and also the logic behind it. The video or the YouTube that is the subject of discussion and quizzing, and unfortunately it's a bit too long, and I'm not sure if we will find enough time to watch the whole thing together. Only 54 first 54 minutes of the video is subject to the discussion and quizzing, but still it's long. I have a bit of a presentation, and then watch some important parts of the video and discuss, and also some potential quiz questions that we would like to discuss our answers to. Yeah, we have two essential readings. I don't know if you find enough time to read them, but they're really essential and they're complementary to the video. I intentionally chose two readings that are not academic, so they're written in plain language. The first one is about Trump and Trumpism, and considering the current condition in the US and the return of Trump, it's very interesting to read that article from a magazine, and see if that can explain the current situation. Because the argument is that it's not just Trump, it's not just one person, it's a movement. And even if we get rid of Trump, and if the Americans get rid of Trump, still Trumpism is alive and endures for some historical and structural conditions that the article explains very well, and compares the movement with the Nazis and fascists in Europe, and similarities and differences, of course. The second one is also a very interesting one. It's not an academic article, but it's kind of about introduces a very famous book that came out a few years ago under the title of Surveillance Capitalism, written by Shoshana Zuboff, which explains the role that the new technology plays in creating a new form of authoritarianism under capitalism. So again, both articles are practically debunking the myth about the positive association between capitalism and democracy. Or at least what you get from this is that this relationship is not just a love relationship, it's a mixture of both love and hate between capitalism and democracy. And capitalism inherently contradictory enough to practically weaken real democracy, radical democracy, while keeping on the surface a shallow version of it, an electoral version of it, a representative version of it, a parliamentary version of it that is kind of structured around party politics and so on and so forth, giving people a sense of freedom, whereas in practice they don't have it. Yet, the answer to this question about the relationship between capitalism and democracy depends on the definitions we choose. So if we choose a definition that is kind of a shallow one, that is that you consider democracy as, going to the polls every few years and voting for political party reps and so on and so forth, possibly you can defend the myth to some extent. although that still can be questioned in many ways, because you look at even that representative, as you said, that the representation is not there anymore, or it has become weakened from many people's point of view. But if you take a more radical definition of democracy from bottom up, direct democracy, deliberative democracy, radical democracy, that people come together, make the decisions as far as it's possible. Society or the politics is structured around councils, local councils sending up their nominees to the higher levels of councils, and the parliament, the national parliament, would become the council of councils. Workplaces are run and controlled and managed by the employees, by the workers, making decisions democratically together about what to produce, how to produce, and what to do with the profit of it. Then you will see significant contradiction between that version of democracy and capitalism, because capitalism is based on it's based on profit motive, maximize the profit. You look at every capitalist corporate firm, you hardly find anything democratic happening in there. Their purpose is to maximize the revenues and incomes for their shareholders. The bosses are not elected, and so on and so forth. You see that this is and the influence of that sector, as Chomsky explains very well, into the politics, that the economic power yields political power and vice versa. Therefore, you see that huge contradiction between capitalism and, in fact, in opposite directions. They're in opposite directions. But looking at the history, as again Chomsky explains, and many other sources, looking at the history of democracy and capitalism, especially in the Western countries, we realize that actually practically even that shallow democracy, representative democracy, has been imposed upon capitalism by the movements, labor movements, workers movements, working classes movements, women's movements. All wanted their own right to vote, because the right to vote was limited to the property owners. Prior to that, only capitalists could actually vote. The Senate in America was unelected. It used to be unelected, and so on and so forth. So you see that actually democracy is something that is imposed upon capitalism, but capitalism has found many ways of living with that kind of democracy that is imposed upon it by the movements, and while keeping it on the facade that people are enjoying freedom of choice, and at the same time compromising it, at the same time corrupting it from within. I've jumped to the conclusion, but let's see how we can get there. So before we watch this, and also I have included the some of these potential quiz questions. I would like to, before I start, I would like to have a word with those who possibly find this a bit too challenging because of the readings or because of my presentations, and you might be feeling that I'm bombarding you with so many ideas and so on and so on. In this course, you can be very pragmatic. You can pass this course, maybe even with the credits, if you just limit yourself. If you're really under pressures and you find this very demanding, just limit yourself to things that are expected to pass the course. For instance, you can just simply watch the video. Even the quiz questions are shared with you, when the answers to these questions are discussed in the class, and with the possibly the very limited amount of time, you can actually make sure that you do the quizzes successfully. I could put all the quizzes at the maybe end of week 5 or something, 15 points, 15 questions quiz, but I thought let's distribute that across the weeks, so we make sure that the engagement is constant across the weeks, so you won't feel pressure at the end for a 15-point quiz. Okay. Yeah, so this is the idea. The economic liberalization brings about political liberalization, And we would like to, and the response to this is that capitalism is practically in contradiction with real democracy, and because it makes politics subordinate to the economy for the reasons that we will explain later. And if democracy is something really positive and good, that we actually go to wars, we launch wars with other countries in order to export democracy to them. We fight, we spend millions and billions of dollars fighting dictators like Saddam Hussein or Bin Laden or the Taliban in Afghanistan and so on and so forth. Then why not expanding democracy from the politics into other aspects of life at home? Like, as I said before, like in workplaces, like in the economy and so on and so forth. So you can see also parallels between this week's myth, that economic liberalization, you liberalize the economy, you achieve significant economic growth, and as the result of that, society becomes prosperous, and through some mechanisms, then this would translate itself into more democracy. We had almost a similar kind of myth last week, which was about equality and social justice, that the society is more capitalistic under especially neoliberalism. Liberalization of the economy results in greater amount of wealth for the society, economic growth, higher economic growth rate, and as the result of that, the society will be able to look after its poor, and inequality would drop, trickle down would happen, and we saw that even many of the proponents of that ideology have given up, and they came out and said, like, sorry, we oversold that ideology, trickle down hasn't happened. Practically, even as the result of not looking after equality, we have not achieved the economic rate we used to have when we were looking after equality in the mid 20th century during the welfare state era, the so-called golden age of capitalism. The golden age of capitalism were much more social democratic than capitalistic. And when we became more capitalistic by adopting neoliberalism being capitalism on a steroid, we lost both growth and equality, and trickle down didn't happen. The same can be said here too. In fact, the more the society becomes more competitive, the more capital takes the center stage or central role, the more democracy is hurt and damaged. These two myths are also very much related. If you may remember, the reformist solution to the problem of trickle down that never happened because the rich had tax havens to take their money to in trillions. The solution was that, well, let's look after equality from the beginning. And what would this require? Looking after equality from the beginning, and not just considering economic growth as the top priority. This would require regulations. This would require policy. This would require politics. And you see that the politics enters this stage. And then what sort of politics we want to have in order to look after equality and safeguard economic growth. Therefore, you see that the issue of democracy inevitably becomes another important issue besides the issue of equality. So it's not just equality that we have to look after from the beginning, but also the issue of democracy. The way that we want to run the politics needs to be looked after. So ideologies play a significant role in convincing people about myths, selling the myths to the populations. And they come up with all sorts of reasonings, they refer to all sorts of evidence, And we have two types of evidence. One is the, I would say, surface evidence, things that appear as they appear. And as I said before, Albert Einstein said, if the surface reality was capable of explaining things, we didn't need sciences. You wake up in the morning, you see the sun is rising from the east, and in the middle of the day goes up above your head and then goes down in the west at the dusk. Then that's the surface evidence, and by looking at that, you say, okay, it's the sun that turns around the earth. But if you think deeper and investigate deeper, you realize that it's 180 degrees opposite. It's completely the opposite of that. It's actually the earth that turns around the sun. So the same here, you know, they refer to surface reality. The correlation is causation. You look at the advanced capitalist societies, they're enjoying higher levels of democracy compared to non-capitalist societies like North Korea, Cuba, I don't know, Vietnam or other places that are less capitalistic from their point of view. And then they're less democratic as well. So more capitalism is correlated with more democracy, representative democracy, of course, and less capitalism is associated with less democracy. And that means that if you want to be more democratic, you better go for capitalism. These two things come together as a package. But it's not exactly, you see, this is again looking at the sun turning around the earth. Practically, it's the opposite. So this is one of the, Friedrich Hayek is another central figure or founding figure in neoliberalism, the school of, or neoclassical school in economics. We became familiar with the other founding figure last week. If you may remember, Milton Friedman was the name. And this guy is another figure. And he was Austrian. He died, of course, and he experienced Nazi Germany, fascism, rise of fascism, and the demise of fascism, and the destructions that was left behind. Also, he looked at the Soviet Union at around the same time, which was another dictatorial power. And he came up with this idea that actually the reason that this we ended up having fascism and communism is because the government it commands the economy, and the economy is almost fully controlled by the government. And if we liberate the economy, we liberate the society. If we just make sure that the market is free from any interferences, except for the sake of the protections of property rights, therefore we end up having a free society as well. So this is a quote from him. Economic control is not merely control of a sector of human life which can be separated from the rest, he wrote. It is the control of the means of all our ends. So you see, economy for this guy is everything, right? It means that you control the economy, you control everything. You let the economy go free, you let the society go free. And why economy is so central to these people? Because from their worldviews point of view, from their ontological, as we say, point of view, the society is embedded in the economy. And it's kind of a strange idea. You know, you talk to a child, you know, we say, is it society that includes the economy, or is that economy includes society? Our social relationships, look at the social relationships. Some of them are economic, you know, and transactions that happens between us economically. A lot of them are not economic. So social relationships can be economic and can be non-economic. But economic relations are all of them are social relationships because there are interactions between people. So in simple terms, I think it's very obvious that it's the society that contains the economy. Economy is part of society because our economic relationships are social, but not every social relationship is economic. But from their point of view, it's so strange that they say actually it's the economy that includes the society. It's quite opposite, it's upside down. And so there's a lot of other strange ideas that these people, that if the society, there is no such thing as society from their point of view. Even they, as Thatcher said, there's no such thing as society. It's all individuals interacting with each other. And these individuals are kind of, I would say, robots. They're like robots or calculators that they just think about maximizing their benefits and minimizing their disadvantages. And this is how the society is seen by these people. So this guy and Milton Friedman both ended up supporting Pinochet, the dictator in Chile, and other puppet dictators that functioned under capitalism. In 1973, if you may know, a coup happened in Chile, and they removed a democratically elected government and replaced them with a dictator known as Pinochet, who committed lots of war crimes against humanity, killed many people, and so on and so forth. But this guy actually supported that. Why? Why do you think someone who tries to avoid authoritarianism, by actually promoting free economy or free market and free trade, ends up supporting a dictator as brutal as Pinochet? These people differentiate between liberalism and democracy. For them, liberalism is the one that they want. And liberalism or freedom, a liberal freedom, means people having rights to their properties, private properties. And of course, this gives advantage to the property owners, right? But they say that this is the meaning of freedom. So liberalism is what they worship. But that we are normally thought that liberalism is equal to democracy. Democracy is equal to liberalism. We even have a term called liberal democracy, right? But that's not the case. This is not the case with these founding fathers and their ideology. In this ideology, democracy is desirable as far as people keep voting for deregulation, voting for privatization, commercialization, financialization, and so on and so forth. If out of the ballot box comes a perfectly democratically elected government that favors socialism or even socialistic principles like social democracy, or wants to add more regulations to the economy to make things a little bit fairer, oh no, that's bad. So we don't want that. That's a very dangerous thing, that kind of democracy. So you wouldn't be then. So they for these people, in the name of liberty, for the sake of private property. So it's liberty is only name. Behind that is private property. So for this guy, so that's another quote from him about Pinochet. I have not been able to find a single person, even in much maligned Chile, who did not agree that personal freedom was much greater under Pinochet than it had been under Allende. So personal freedom. So personal freedom means that the rich had the right to keep their own properties and amass more and more, accumulate more and more. That is personal freedom. And for this guy, under a dictator like Pinochet, personal freedom was much higher. You see, this is highly limited understanding and intentionally reduced understanding of freedom to only property ownership. So they call it negative freedom. That the difference between negative freedom and positive freedom. Negative freedom, you live You leave people to themselves, you know, to compete, and you don't interfere, and that is the freedom. And for them, this is the best freedom, versus the positive freedom. And positive freedom is when you try to help someone achieve their goals. This way, you are actually trying to interfere, and that's not a good thing. But practically, what happens through the negative freedom, if you start with negative freedom, leave people to themselves, leave the businesses to themselves to do whatever they want, mostly, then monopolies would grow, and then crisis would grow, and then, like Obama, you end up interfering, saving them by the money from the taxpayers, and practically you end up doing positive freedom that these people hate, which means interference. The state is to protect, you know, so your property wouldn't be damaged as the result of someone else's activities, but it's your property. But what if you don't have property? What if the majority don't have property? We haven't pressed any, there is no reset button to press and say, everybody give up your properties. We're going to redistribute everything equally between everyone. And then let's start. We have never seen, we're not going to do that. We have never had such a thing. So societies have always almost been unequal, especially under capitalism. And you end up having majority that are deprived of property, and they have nothing to sell except their labor, mental and manual labor. And these people that own capital as their own properties, their own means of production as their own properties. So you see, this is when they say individual, personal, when they talk about people, when they talk about person, they don't mean you and me. They mean the rich people, the property owners. They are the persons. We are human animals. We are human animals. We're nothing because we don't have money. We don't have capital. We don't have properties. I mean, when we talk about property, it's not just the house and the car. The property from their point of view is the capital, the property that goes back into the economy and circulates and produces and results in economic growth. Our house, our carpet, and those are our cup, the food in the fridge, they don't produce things. They don't result in economic growth. Okay, they're just there to be consumed. Okay, now there are many justifications. I should speed up. More economic liberalization results in more economic growth, and as the result of that, you will see your middle class would grow in size. So the economy grows, prosperity comes, more people become prosperous. You will end up having a bigger middle class, and the middle class. I mean, we practically showed that economic liberalization actually reduced economic growth, if you remember last week. But let's assume that that's the case. Okay, let's suppose that's the case. And then say, okay, well, the middle class grows in size, more and more people become richer, and as the result of that, have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the theory? So these people, when the people are their basic needs are satisfied, then they start to crave for higher levels of needs, like, where is my freedom of expression? Where is my freedom of association? Where is my human rights? Where is my civil rights? Why the education doesn't have good quality? So they would crave for better quality of life, and they would demand more democracy. And as the result of that, the middle class created out of economic liberalization and economic growth would put pressure on the government to open up the politics and then make the politics competitive like the economy, rebuild the politics in the image of the economy. These people want the politics to be reshaped in the image of the economy, not the other way around. They don't want the economy to They don't want the politics to interfere in the economy. They want the economy to interfere into the politics. They want to make the politics look like the economy, not the other way around. So as the result of this, the middle class would put pressure on the governments and dictatorial governments that have already adopted economic liberalization, and then they have to become less dictatorial. For two reasons, for two very evident reasons, this is again another myth. Because if you look at this is based on a terrible misunderstanding of the history of democracy and the middle class and the working class in the West. If you look at the history of the West, as Chomsky explains, actually it was democracy that came first, and then prosperity was redistributed more equally between social classes. It was because of the working classes that revolted and had uprisings and had movements and then put pressures, and then they gained their rights to vote, and they gained their rights to have unions and associations, that then the politics was reformed, and as a result of the reformation of the politics, the economy became fairer in terms of the redistribution of resources. And as the result of that, the working class became the middle class in the West. So you see that the middle class was the product of or outcome of the working classes revolting against capitalism. Whereas if you look at China and other dictatorial societies that have adopted capitalism by and large, although China didn't adopt neoliberalism completely, but it was very gradual, and the state still has control over many key aspects of the economy. But if you look at each one of them, practically, yes, you see the rise of the middle classes. Millions of people are lifted up from below the poverty line and so on and so forth. And the middle class has emerged in China and many other countries like Vietnam and other the so-called non-democratic societies. But this artificially made middle class has no interest in democracy, shows no interest. You don't see them revolting in the streets against the Chinese government. They are actually complicit in many of the crimes these governments commit. And they don't care, because if they want better education, more freedom of expression or lifestyle, they open up branches of their businesses overseas. They send their kids to the best universities overseas in the West, and so on and so forth. They travel overseas. They buy properties overseas. Why they should stay in China and revolt against the Chinese Communist Party or other centralized forms of government, and make life worse for themselves, so they wouldn't be able to run their businesses anymore? There's nothing essential. This is called essentialism. There's nothing essential in describing any nation. Nations are highly dynamic. I mean, they revolted against actually the Chinese Revolution against colonialism was also for democracy. They wanted freedom, but well, this is what they achieved, and they can't really at this stage liberate themselves. But you see that freedom has been, as you said, the dream of humanity, almost across the history, almost from the first time the slaves revolted, Spartacus or whatever. So they have been craving for freedom, they to some extent they have achieved something. There have been many setbacks and so on and so forth. So it's a history-long story, the craving for democracy. Actually, democracy, you can see very, I would say, a primordial version of it among the indigenous. Many decisions they make are very collective. Prior to the invention of agriculture, even the first 5,000 years of agriculture. There's a very interesting book. You can go on YouTube and search for it. The Dawn of Everything, by David Graeber and David something, and it's a TED talk. And this anthropologist actually discovered they investigated the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, and they discovered that even after over 5,000 years after the invention of agriculture, because we used to think that with the invention of agriculture, societies became hierarchical, but they disproved that. They showed that for 5,000 years, we were agricultural civilization and we were not hierarchical. Because the assumption was that agriculture results in surplus value, right? You can, unlike the rabbit that gets rotten, you can always save the grains and extra grains once some people become more interested in it, and then they use force to appropriate it, and the hierarchy emerges out of that. But it didn't. For 5,000 years, people resisted that tendency to develop hierarchies around the surplus that they were the surplus product, the surplus produce. And there are other things. There are other justifications, like, for instance, the advancements in technologies, communication technologies, and so on and so forth, would result in more democracy because people are now freer in terms of seeking information. It's no longer the mass media manipulating people. People can have access to a broader range of informations and perspectives through the internet. You see some elements of truth in that, but for a society that is highly divided, economically, politically, already divided, economically, politically, and culturally, and this environment turned out to be actually tribalizing us, dividing us into tribes. People don't talk normally to others who disagree with them, so you limit your friendship to those who agree with you practically. And it's not just that, but even algorithms actually magnify this. So you watch a Sky News only once, and the next day you keep watching, more and more Sky News comes, and then you end up believing that everybody kind of agrees with the Sky News. You can actually end up letting them brainwash you, and especially the ones that pretend they are against the establishment, against the elite. They are more likely to convince you. If you're disappointed with the system, they're more likely to convince you that they are right, even if they are sources of misinformation, like Trumpism, or Sky News, and so on and so forth. So they pretend there are alternatives to the establishment, but they are actually not. They are another version of establishment. Okay. Or they say that the politics should be, as I said, structured in the image of the economy. What would they mean by this? In a kind of a free competitive, so-called free competitive economy, people vote by their money, by buying and selling, especially by buying or consuming. Imagine McDonald's and KFC. In KFC's sandwiches, the quality drops. So what would happen? The assumption is that the people became disappointed with that, and they punish KFC by not buying their sandwiches and going to McDonald's, or vice versa. So this way, they are exercising their power, $1, one vote issue, and this way KFC is incentivized to improve its quality to be competitive with McDonald's, and this gives freedom of choice to everyone and makes the environment healthy in terms of being competitive, and so on and so forth. And what if we build the politics, and they have done it actually? What if we build the politics in the same way? What are the corporations, the McDonald's and KFCs of the political system? What are the big corporations, the McDonald's and the KFCs of the political system? Because we want to we want to structure the politics the same way we structure capitalist markets. You know, the competition between giants, competitions between corporations and businesses, and the power of the consumers. Who are the ones that in the political arena sell their sandwiches in the form of policies? And you can reward them or you can penalize them by consuming their sandwich policies. Political parties, right? The political parties are the KFCs and McDonald's of the political arena. So if people are unsatisfied with this major political party, because they're short of, they end up short of $500 for their childcare at the end of the year, then they go and vote for the other political party. You dislike, you want to penalize Escomo, you go and vote for Albanese. Or you want to penalize Biden, you go and vote for Trump, and vice versa. You see that this is the economy, the politics is but like the economy that ends up in having monopolies, such a politics also ends up having its own monopolies. That's why you look at this Western society, it's always been two major parties. And if you're dissatisfied with both of them and you want to go beyond this two major political party system, good luck. Or there are perhaps third options, but they would never amount to the level that would become a challenge to these two monopolies. You know, these votings are like the choices people make between McDonald's and KFC. Practically, at the end of the day, there's not really, the differences are not that much, although they make it look big. Yeah. But practically there is no, and these votings are like, you know, they create a kind of on the facade, creates a delusion that we have a choice. Whereas practically, what's the choice? I mean, practically you end up having either of two.
But you know, the ranked choice voting, do they have it in Australia at all, where you can say that this is my first choice and my second choice and my third choice?
Yes, but the way that it's organized, your vote gets into the ones that are getting the maximum. Yeah. So you have to have the majority's consent that they would vote for a different party. But those different parties, you know, face a lot of obstacles because most of the money goes into the bigger ones. So you see that these monopolies would prevent, like in the economy, that the business monopolies prevent the other ones to grow. Okay. So according to this ideology, politics must be modeled based on the free market. Political parties are the suppliers of solutions, and policy changes, and citizens are their consumers. When for any reason the demand for a specific way of running the system increases, the party that can satisfy the demand will be the winner. So you see, that looks like an economy. It's not a politics, it's an economy. That's why a guy like Trump says, I'm a successful businessman, so I can run the politics as well. And people accept that, many people. But like the free market where monopolies grow in such a capitalist political system, the major parties behave like KFC versus McDonald's, offering the same paradigm while exaggerating their differences to create a delusion of free choice or freedom of choice. Studies after studies, this is one of them in the next system project website, that actually shows, regardless of what major party has been in power in the United States, all those indicators that are related to quality of life have been declining. From the wages stagnations, the working conditions and labor standards, ecological standards, inequality, poverty, each one of these actually indicators of quality of life have witnessed significant decline, regardless of what party has been in power. And the same with the rest of other countries. The more you have accepted capitalism, especially the Anglo-Saxon, the American version of it, the neoliberal version of it, the more quality of life has declined for the majority of the people. Look at Australia, almost the same, although in a slower motion. And in the European countries, also the worse. Same story. But there are, so you said democracy cannot be delivered by a system that undermines it in the first place, since the winners in a free market economy can always use their power and resources to influence the state and politics. That's what Chomsky also says. You have more economic power, make sure that you will make a good use of that into the politics in order to maintain your upper hand. And Citizens United is a very interesting case. It's an exemplary case. We don't have it in possibly in Australia. I don't know what's the limit of, is there any limit over the donations that business can do to the politics? If there is no limits, then we are like the United States. According to this Citizens United, they actually remove the limit in the US. So they allow the businesses to make donations to political parties. And as Chomsky says, when the election season comes, it's the investment season for the businesses, big businesses, banks, and especially corporations, big corporations, and they make donations to both sides of politics. It's interesting, and whoever wins would look after us. But I would say it's more than that. It's not just bad apples behaving badly, becoming naughty, abusing their economic power in order to buy politicians so the politicians would look after them. It's more than that. It's something bigger than that. It's more inherent in the system, and that makes the capitalism inevitably being ended up in this situation. And what is that? I'll tell you. Imagine that we're in the paradise that capitalists want us to take to, and that in that paradise it's complete competition, full competition. Everybody is free to pursue their profit as far as it doesn't hurt the other person or the other party or player. So in this situation, that is all based on competition, maximization of the profit. Deregulations, you minimize regulations as much as you can. How would you plan for your future if you're a business owner? How difficult that would be for you to plan for the future. It would be extremely difficult. Everybody is left to themselves, and they compete, and they can behave in any way that you can't really plan anything. So uncertainty, and it is one of the criticisms of the so-called free market, is that it's highly chaotic. No political system dares to go down the path of this ideology, because they know it becomes too chaotic, that even would destroy capitalism, results in mass uprisings, in disappointments, and so on and so forth, and crimes and corruption, and so on and so forth. So no one dares. But let's imagine we go there and we start from there, from that kind of paradise. It would be extremely difficult for the businesses, for enterprises, to plan for the future. And as the result of that, that's why they inject money into the politics, to secure some certainty, to bend the laws and regulations in their own favor. So the planning would become possible for them. So they would know where to put their money. Okay? So they would know where to put their money. So that's why capitalism, the more capitalism you have, the more things becomes competitive, the more things become chaotic, the more uncertainty exists. And as the result of that, the bigger players try to secure more certainty, they use their money into the politics in order to make sure that the regulations and the laws would pave the way for their victory constantly. Or in fact, inject certainty for them by injecting certainty into the system for them so they can function more efficiently, more effectively. Yeah, I would skip these to give ourselves a little bit more time for the video. So what are the solutions? Some would say, let's go for the Chinese model, and Chinese model has its own problems and so on and so forth. The Scandinavian model maybe is a better one and can actually bring capitalism, democracy together. But the problem, imagine Bernie Sanders, someone like Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn would win elections, and things would become a little bit more socially democratic. But you would need other countries on board. Otherwise, the capital would fly. If you put more regulations on capital inside your country, the capital can fly, whereas the labor cannot fly. So capital can fly and go and send punishes you, or the capital can go on a strike. They can send their money to tax havens and hoard it there and penalize you and your country and your economy. And why they can do that? Because you have already made yourself so dependent on them. You know, your economy is so dependent on the big business for economic growth. So they can penalize you. But more recently, this has become a little bit more difficult for capital to fly because of divisions between capitalist camps that are growing. The Chinese capitalism versus American capitalism versus European capitalism versus Russian capitalism versus Middle Eastern capitalism. They are now in kind of conflict with each other and makes capital less capable of flying. And as the result of that, capital is actually now relying more on nationalistic, ethno-nationalist politics, the semi-fascist like Trump, to maintain its political supremacy. Chomsky, he explains that why they hate it. They hated it from the beginning. They made sure that the constitutions, if their democracy is kind of implemented or structured into the constitution, that democracy would be, from participatory point of view, would be dysfunctional. It's up to people to push for it. There have been rallies against the genocide. I mean, how many of us have attended those rallies? How many of us have signed the petitions? How many of us are complaining and protesting against the crimes against humanity that happens? That's a colonialist power over there. That's one of the remnants of an apartheid regime in a colonial. And we expect that things would change in our favor. I mean, we can't really, sit back and watch and become complicit practically by our own silence and expect that things would change. But actually, practically, it was as the result of the pressures and the rallies of millions of people, the protests that happened across the world, that the pressures on the UN resulted in some, condemnations, even if they were vetoed by the United States. And finally, the pressures on our government here in Australia, that they finally they demanded ceasefire. But they practically are not penalizing the criminal by cutting their diplomatic relationships, by cutting their economic relationships. You have to penalize, you have to put sanctions. If Russians are committing any crimes, we put hundreds of thousands of sanctions over them. But if it is the country that we think that we like, no sanctions. They have the right to defend themselves.
Or their allies.
Yeah, our allies, yes. So they have the right to defend themselves by flattening a society, by killing hundreds of kids and women. That's a self-defense. We live in such a society. We live in such a world. It's so brutal. If you think about it and use your human, dignity, you'll see that it's bad. It's really, really bad. We haven't been. I mean, every one of us are so powerless. Yes, I understand. our power is incompatible, but our power is in our numbers. If each one of us do little things, still those little things make a difference, can make a difference at the end of the day. That was my opinion about the situation. You may disagree, but I'm using that as an example that to make the case for to make the argument forward, move the argument forward. So just a reflection on what we have learned so far. In Big Two, we realized that capitalism is not just a thing, but rather it's power relationship. It's a social relationship. It's about the production of that thing. It's about the ownership of that thing, the wealth. It's about the redistribution of that thing. It's about the circulation of that thing, and all the social relationships that are formed around the ownership of the capital, the power that capital give to its owners. So it's the differences and the power dynamics, dynamism between the owners of capital and those who don't own capital. And it's a system that actually, capitalism is a system that actually considers capital as the source of value. If you own the capital, you have right over the products, either in goods or services. The workers, you only hire them into the system, you extract value out of them, the value goes into the product, and you own it because you put the capital. Whereas the labor put their labor power, but by adding their labor power to the production process, they don't own anything. Whereas you, as the capital owner, you own everything. You own the product, the outcome, the output. And so you see that value is determined and defined by capital. So capitalism is not just about redistribution of value between people. So the capital owners would get more value than the labor owners or the laborers. It's also about defining what should be valued. Okay. So it's not about just expropriation or appropriation of sources of value, but also defining or determining what should be valued. So if that's the case, I mean, think of imagine that you're in conversation with an indigenous person or an indigenous community and ask them what would they value or want to value. Do you think, what would you expect to hear from them? Imagine that community has maintained their own indigenous way of living and not absorbed into our modern system. Would they be valuing the latest version of iPhone or their smartphones or highways? More highways built into the habitats that would destroy the natural habitat and those sort of things? No. Would they be valuing the GDP or how much money Bill Gates has, or how much wealth the Australian nation has accumulated in the hands of a few billionaires? No, they wouldn't value these things. They would value, as you said, living in balance with nature and living balance in among themselves. I wouldn't romanticize indigenous way of living. We know that indigenous communities, for instance, in the America, they destroyed the environment as well in order for hunting the buffaloes and so on and so forth. This sort of behaviors, you can find such behaviors in them, or the hierarchy within them, the male versus female and those sort of things. But by and large, they're more in favor of the community's well-living. They have they have primitive ways of looking after that, but they're not in favor of maximizing the accumulation of money or capital or those sort of things. So by and large, they have been living in kind of harmony and balance with their habitats and within themselves. The elderly is more respected and they sit at the higher level. That is because the elderly knows where to hunt and how to hunt. The knowledge they have, especially their verbal communities, they're not written communities. So these levels of hierarchies are not creating the crisis that we see today. They don't destroy the ecology or environment to the scale that capitalism does. So you can find parallels like that, but this is just so significantly different. So if we value quality of life for the community, then therefore we end up having a completely different society. Therefore, when we talk about inequality, we're not worried about the top 1% versus the bottom 99%, or waging women, the housewives, and so on and so forth. I'm not against that the housewives should also receive some wage, because their work actually contributes to the society and it's unwaged. But all these struggles that happens between the working class and the capitalist class, between women, women seeking higher share or better share of the economy, they're all about, where is my share out of the value that capitalism has produced, the money. That's one story, that's one type of a struggle. The other type of a struggle is over what we should actually value in the first place. Shouldn't that be care? Shouldn't that be love? Shouldn't that be peaceful relationship? Shouldn't that be well-being of the society, everyone in that, inclusive well-being? If these are the things that we need to value, therefore we have another front to fight. It's not all about where is my share of the wealth that is created under capitalism, or let's spend some of that wealth to protect the environment. It's not just that. So that's why in my book, I have actually reformulated what Marx and Karl Marx and has said before, Marx and Engels. The history, they said, the history in their book, I think the Communist Manifesto, they say the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles between freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master, and so on and so forth. So you see that they're looking at the struggles between the workers and the employers and employees, between the working class and the capitalist class. Over what? Over the distribution or redistribution of the opportunities and the wealth and the capital that is produced under the same system. Where if we actually expand our definition of value and expand our definition of a struggle, not just between the working class and the capitalist class, but between value makers and value takers. And the value makers could include even non-humans. It could include housework, care work, domestic work, or whatever you may call it. Therefore, the value maker and value taker is much broader kind of concept for the struggle. But it's not all about this, value makers versus value takers and their fight over the distribution of value that is produced under the same system, but also about what should be valued, what should constitute value, and the structure that is needed for that value, new value to be true value to be produced. And I see that if you expand the definition of value, if you consider that not only labor is the source of value, the labor of the worker, but also the labor of the wife of the worker or the partner of the worker, but also the labor of public institutions, public services, the labor that goes into them, but also the labor of nature. Nature also works, like the bees work, the wind works, the clouds work, the entire nature works. And if you expand that value, the definition of value and the sources of value beyond the working class, then you can also include, you can integrate, create integration and solidarity between the working class movements and the women's movements and the environmentalist movements and so on and so forth, instead of seeing them divided. Okay, we need a more comprehensive understanding of value in order to create a common platform between societies, between social movements. So in terms of the politics, encounters happen between value makers and value takers, classical labor movements and class conflicts, feminist and civil rights movements, intersectionalist struggles, and environmentalists against the extraction of capitalist value out of nature and its association with social injustice. That's one struggle, and give all value makers a fair share of capitalist value and more participation in or control over the means or modes of production. That's one struggle. The other struggle that we normally, unfortunately, forget about is this one, the struggle over defining value, redefining value from the life's point of view, life as a commons. So how we can redefine value, as true value? Look at life. Life works like commons. Are you familiar with the concept of commons? Yeah. What are commons? Yeah, we know a forest, for instance. Right? A forest is a commons. All the animals or living beings contribute to that, and they all benefit to the extent that it wouldn't destroy the forest. Okay, or look at a lake or something, or even a little pond. They're all life. It has structured itself in the form of commons. You look after your parents inside our households. How do we deal with each other? It's another comment. We don't compete with each other. We don't exploit each other. At least we're not expected to do that, right? So we're expected to look after each other inside our households, inside our communities. There is no competition or exploitation or someone having upper hand over the others. So that's a commons. So what if we structure the entire economy in this way? Well, just looking at life, how life works. Right? So look at the indigenous people. I'm not in favor of romanticizing, but there are very interesting lessons we can learn from them. The concept of buen vivir, which means living together in peace. And movements from the global south, especially, they can inspire us to redefine value. So I'm very much in favor of redefining value by looking at the commons and restructuring the economy in the form of commons. So everything is shared, resources are shared, people contribute to that to the extent that they can, and they benefit from it to the extent they contribute to, considering also their disabilities and health problems. So they would also be compensated, so they wouldn't be left behind. So that gives us a different type of or sense or definition of value and justice and so on and so forth. I think, yeah, I mean, again, you can see the differences. You know, there are responses and alternatives like New Social Democracy. They want to reform the system, and there are also more radical ones that they want to go for different types of system, like solidarity economy, democratic eco-socialism, degrowth, post-growth, eco-anarchism. Later on, maybe in the middle of the semester, that would be the best time for you to think about which one of these alternatives, if you're interested in this topic, the democracy aspect of capitalism and post-capitalism, which one of these you would like to choose for your essay. And if you have any questions, you can talk to me. You can, if you have no idea what any one of these may mean, just look at Wikipedia definition, or you can also look at ChatGPT just to get a basic sense. Make yourself familiar. If any one of them interests you, you choose it as the topic for your essay. If you're interested in the ecological aspect, there is another list of alternatives that you can consider, and only choose one for your essay, and then you start your annotated bibliography as the very first step. So we'll discuss that later. So I should stop, and I don't think I have left ourselves enough time, unfortunately, to watch the video, the entire video. Have you watched it? Okay, that's very good then. Have you how about you? You watched it? Okay. Maybe we watch. Is there any question? Maybe we watch the first 20 minutes for the quiz questions. My assumption is that people, at least in theory, have watched the videos prior to the class, but I understand that many of you also work and have other courses to do and you're very busy. But if you could manage to watch as much as you can, well, the next one would be shorter and it would be the last one anyway. Okay, let's have a look at these quiz questions and see if, what extent we can answer them. The first one says, according to Noam Chomsky, how does capitalism impact the functioning of democracy? Government policies reducing the power of corporations, reducing the influence of money in politics, accumulation of wealth and its influence in politics, promoting equal redistribution of wealth. Yes, yeah, very obvious. Well done. So what strategies did Noam Chomsky identify as being used since the 70s to increase the concentration of wealth and power among a small elite, undermining democratic processes, especially since the 70s? What happened to capitalism that democracy became more undermined? It was a reverse, they revolted against the revolutions. The capitalist system tried to do counter revolution through some mechanisms. What were those two things? Well, financialization and offshoring, yeah. Increasing, no. Expanding workers' right, no. Promoting free trade agreements, no. So yeah, I mean, did you understand financialization, offshoring, the way Chomsky was talking about? Yeah, okay. So everything, financialization is like, instead of buying and selling goods and services, we buy and sell prices of the companies that are called shares or stocks. Or we buy and sell contracts between people, agreements like in the form of loans. I borrow money from you, and that goes into a contract, and someone else comes and buy that contract from the bank that organizes this. And so that becomes the subject of buying and selling. So that becomes financialization. A lot of money is lent, a lot of money is borrowed, a lot of money, they play with, as they say, they play with money to make more money rather than getting involved into the production, because production is already offshored. So these two things complement each other. You financialize your country as an advanced capitalist, play with the money that comes from where? Offshore jobs, where there's no super exploited workers are producing a lot of wealth. So the manufacturing sector is exported outside, it's offshore, and the money comes in, and then we play with the money and we magnify the money. That's called financialization. So they go hand in hand, financialization and offshoring. So financialization is more money with money. And it impacts, it regulates. You can buy the shares of companies that produce commodities and goods. You can influence trade. You can bet on a trade. You can buy things based on an expected future price. There's a lot of games that they have come up with, lots of instruments, financial instruments like dividends, futures, options. I have names. I can't really pretend that I understand them really. They're very complex, really, really complex. But as in just nutshell, in simple terms, it's money making more money. And through that process, that you can bet on commodities prices in future, past, present, and You can buy things and hoard them and then wait until things get more expensive and things like that. Or you can lend money to the people who produce something and demand interests and so on and so forth. So that interest, demanding interest or rent, they are financialization. Rent, interest, those sort of things are financialization. They grow around the production, but they have now become much bigger and much more powerful than production and circulation of goods and services. So question number 3, according to Noam Chomsky, how have changes in taxation contributed to undermining of economic equality and welfare state in the United States? I think that's very obvious. Increasing taxes for all income brackets, eliminating all forms of taxes, introducing flat tax, or significantly reducing taxes on the wealthy and corporations. Which one do you think? The last one, yes. What does Noam Chomsky argue is a major consequence of regulatory capture? We unfortunately didn't have time to play that bit in the context of financial regulations. By regulatory capture, he means that the banks and the big businesses that are supposed to be regulated, they become so powerful that they regulate their regulators. Right? The government regulators. So what would be the consequence of that? The consequence of that, when they go bust, then the government comes and use the taxpayers' money to bail them out. So that's the answer to this. According to Noam Chomsky's analysis, how does Citizens United versus FEC Supreme Court decision? That's related to the issue of limits over the donations to the political parties. That became possible by considering corporations as individuals, giving them personal rights. So as you, as a person, a citizen, have the right to make a donation to your favorite political parties, why not a corporation? So that would be the answer to this question.